we're driving through something called the Virgin River Gorge. It's a section of I-15 right after you leave Utah, and it cuts through like the very northwestern edge of Arizona, like the northwestern corner, for about, I don't know, 5 or 10 or 20 minutes. And then you go into Nevada and down to the Las Vegas area. Wanted to talk briefly today about the subject of octane, the gasoline octane, and how that affects the performance of your turbocharged engine, or really any engine. In an EcoBoost, or I should say a Powerboost hybrid, which is just a 3.5 liter EcoBoost twin turbo V6 with an electric motor, a 50 horsepower electric motor attached to it, attached to the side of the transmission, and a 1.5 kilowatt hour battery. That's basically the hybrid system. And it allows you to save it, some amount of gas by taking vehicle momentum and converting it into electricity, storing it in the battery, and then, at the appropriate time, taking it back out of the battery, turning it back into momentum, torque on the part of that motor that's also a generator, and pushing the vehicle forward. And by doing that, you save some gas. And there's a big debate about, well, exactly how much gas are you actually saving? That's the $1 million question that everybody wants to know. And there's been a lot of talk about it on the forums and on the Facebook groups. And, well, for our part, we've driven the truck almost 5,000 miles. And in extended highway driving, we have never once seen 24 miles to the gallon. Yesterday, going through Denver, going through the western half of Colorado, the Rocky Mountains, and then the southeastern portion of Utah, for the day, we actually were pretty impressed with the average MPGs we got. It was something like 20 or maybe 21 over the course of about 550 or 600 miles, driving up and down through really, really steep mountains. Because what the truck was able to do is, on the downhill sections like we're on right now, it actually cut off the engine and it charged the battery. And then when you got to the bottom of whatever downhill slope you were on, and then you started back up, the other side of it, it released that energy back into the drivetrain, and did a lot of electric driving, charging on the downhill, electric driving on the uphill, back and forth and back and forth. Saved a lot of gas. Today we got a lot of downhill driving going on, and so you can see we're getting good mileage, 21.1. Not so much uphill, but a lot of downhill. But the thing about octane, it's kind of a complicated subject, in terms of what octane fuel to run in your engine. The owner's manual of the EcoBoost and the Powerboost, which has the same engine, which is an EcoBoost engine, it says don't run anything below 87 octane. And don't run any level of ethanol more than 15%. So you cannot run E85 in this truck. And that's fine, because E85, in our opinion, is a ripoff. Notice that the engine is turned off because we're coasting and going slightly downhill. E85 is a ripoff because you save maybe, I don't know, 15-20% on the cost, but then you lose like 30 or 40% on your MPGs, you know, your fuel efficiency. So actually your cost per mile goes up because you're saving a little bit on the cost of the fuel, but you're losing a lot of your gas mileage. So there is no reason in our minds to use E85. And so the fact that the EcoBoost or the Powerboost can't run on it, that's fine with us, because we weren't going to use it anyway. See the engine, it keeps turning off and on. You know, sometimes it's off while you're going downhill to recharge. And then sometimes when the electric braking and the charging isn't strong enough, it'll turn the engine on to do some engine braking. And then watch, we're getting to the bottom of this downhill stretch here. Get into the throttle, the engine turns back on, and it drives with, you know, the gas engine, with probably a decent amount of electricity being put back into the drivetrain by the hybrid system. I mean, it all just works. You don't even notice it for the most part. The engine turns on and off by itself, very unobtrusively. There's not much of a shock in the you know, the changing cycles and the changing mode. But the you know, so we don't miss the fact that you can't use E85 in this truck. Nobody who's got any intelligence is going to use E85 because, like I said, it's a ripoff. E15 is like 15% ethanol, and you know, again, the fact that ethanol costs less is not made up for it's not worth it, because it costs a little bit less, but it has so much less energy in it that, you know, BTUs, that you don't get the you get terrible gas mileage using E85 or really even E15, because you're burning so much more of that fuel to get down the road. So, you know, E15 it can use. We have not used E15 in it because we don't have any desire to waste our money burning ethanol. And we don't even really think it's that good for the environment either, because, you know, you're spending all that energy growing and refining and, you know, making the corn into ethanol, and, you know, supposedly you actually get less energy out of it than they put into it in all those refining and mixing processes they're going through. So you know, it's just a ripoff as far as we're concerned. But then you get to regular gasoline, and the options usually in most of the country are 87, which is like your regular unleaded, you know, maybe 88 or 89, which is like plus, you know, your regular plus or your mid-grade, and then 91, maybe 93 in some places, and that's like your super unleaded. A lot of people seem to think you need to use 91 octane in an EcoBoost or a Powerboost, and you just don't. There's no need to. Maybe you'll get a little bit more power out of it because it can be more aggressive with the boost. It can be more aggressive with the ignition advance. But you know, we're middle aged. We don't need every last bit of power this thing can possibly put out. You know, we don't need the full 430. And it's not clear whether you actually need to be using 91 to get the full 430 horsepower out of the combined gas engine and hybrid system, or whether you can get the 430 just burning plain old regular 89. I mean, I'm sorry, 87. But we've been running 87 since we bought the truck. There's no detonation or knocking and pinging, anything like that. None whatsoever. And you know, we haven't measured the power, the acceleration, but guess what? It is more than what you're ever going to need just running on 87. So we can't, what we don't hear is any type of knocking or pinging sound, even when the boost is way up above 10 or 12 or 15 psi. When we're going up a long uphill stretch on the interstate, you just don't hear that. If it happens, the system detects it quickly enough and early enough to adjust the spark timing, to adjust the boost, maybe turn it down a little bit, to where it's not going to sit there making that loud knocking and pinging noise for 5, 10, 20, 30 seconds or a minute. You just don't notice it. And so, as far as we're concerned, not only do we never have any need or desire to burn any ethanol fuel mixture or any ethanol gasoline mixture, but we don't even have any need or desire to burn 91 octane premium fuel, because this thing puts out gobs of power. This thing puts out massive amounts of power, even with just plain old 87, and there's no knocking, no pinging or anything. Something else you see when you go through the mountains, like in the Rocky Mountains, Colorado, Wyoming. I don't think I've seen it in like the southern Rockies, like in New Mexico or Arizona, that area. I guess it would be Arizona. One thing we have not seen down there is 85 octane, but we have seen it in Colorado and Wyoming. And, well, the question is, can you use 85 octane in an EcoBoost? The textbook answer is no, you should not. Look at our MPGs here. 23.4 MPGs going mostly downhill. Okay, so now we're out of the Virgin River Gorge. We're going to cross over into Nevada shortly. And then it's going to be pretty much flat and slightly downhill all the way into Las Vegas. But the owner's manual says don't use anything below 87 octane. And, again, the question is, can you use 85 safely? And we will not reveal whether or not we've been using it. But in a naturally aspirated engine, it's perfectly fine. We ran our Ford Expedition out and back through the Rockies, from the Midwest, from Michigan out to San Diego and back. And when we were in the Rockies, we filled it up with 85, had no issues. And the Expedition is not a turbocharged engine. It's a 5.4 2-valve per cylinder, fuel-injected V8, single overhead cam, the year that we have. In 2015, starting in 2015, it picked up the EcoBoost, the 3.5. Pretty much the identical engine that's in the F150. And that was starting in 2015, but our Expedition is older. It's just a plain old 5.4 liter V8, and we had no trouble burning 85 octane in that engine. And we were pulling a trailer that was pretty heavy. It was about the max trailer that truck was rated to pull. It was about a 5,000, 6,000 pound 12-foot enclosed utility trailer. Actually, the owner's manual of that truck, the Expedition, not only does it have a max trailer weight, but it has a max trailer size, like in terms of the dimensions that it wants you to tow. It doesn't want you to tow a really tall, really wide trailer. In terms of like the frontal area, I think it has like 32 square feet is like the max profile of a trailer that truck is rated to pull, because it just doesn't want the engine to have to work too hard and overheat. The limit on how much you can tow is not usually your power, but it's usually the cooling that the amount of cooling that the engine has, that the radiator can provide, as well as the amount of braking it can do. So, that truck had, that engine had a decent amount of power. I want to say 260. And so it didn't have too much trouble pulling that load. But what Ford is saying there is that they didn't want to put, they don't want you towing a huge trailer profile-wise, because the engine might be able to produce the power, but it won't have the cooling to be able to cool it off as you're going, through Death Valley. And believe it or not, we actually ran into that exact scenario. We were going up a very steep stretch coming out of Baker, California on I-15 headed north. It's like 15 minutes and you're going uphill under very heavy load, and the temperature was like 110 degrees that day. And what we saw was that, we actually hit the limits of that expedition, and the temp started to go up and the air conditioning compressor cut out, which was the truck's way of saying, hey, this is almost more than I can take. But it made it up that stretch of very, very demanding highway, in the middle of summer in like July, without overheating. And if we'd had a bigger trailer, yeah, we might have actually overheated the truck. But either way, again, that expedition with a naturally aspirated V8 had no trouble burning 85 octane in the Rockies. And the question is, well, why do they make low octane fuel and specifically sell it in areas that have high altitude? And the reason is because the octane is a measurement of how resistant the fuel is to knocking and pinging and detonation. Those three words all mean the same thing. It's basically pre-ignition. It's the fuel mixture igniting in your combustion chambers before you want it to. It's compression ignition. So with a high compression engine with like 11 or 12 or 13-to-1 compression, it can produce so much heat during the compression stroke. When the piston, gets to the bottom of the cylinder, the intake valve closes and the piston starts pushing up to get back to top dead center. When you've got 12 or 13-to-1 compression, that will make so much heat inside the combustion chamber that your fuel air mixture will explode sometimes and pre-ignite if the octane is low enough. And so you need high octane fuel for a high compression engine, or for a turbocharged engine that has like normal compression, 8 or 9 to 1, but can generate a lot of boost, because that will fill your combustion chambers with a lot of fuel and air. And if the octane's low enough, yeah, you're going to have detonation, and it's going to ignite from the compression, and that will cause all kinds of trouble for you. A gas engine is not built strongly enough to withstand pre-ignition, compression ignition. The ignition cycle has to be very carefully controlled, and your spark timing, your ignition timing is very carefully controlled to manage the cylinder pressure in a gasoline engine. And so again, low octane fuel can cause all kinds of trouble in a high compression engine or in a turbocharged engine. But when you're at high altitude, like in the Rocky Mountains, when you're 5,000, 10,000 feet in elevation, the fact is that you have less air density there. And so in a naturally aspirated engine, you can afford to run lower octane fuel, even 85 octane fuel, because of the fact that the air is so less dense than it is at sea level. And it's still at 23 mpgs. And so with an air fuel mixture that is so less densely packed in a regular engine, 85 octane is just fine at high elevations. Now the question is, well, what about a turbocharged engine at high elevations? Because the turbo, as we discussed in a different video, the turbo is going to counteract your high elevation and correct for it by running higher boost levels and fill your engine up with high density air and fuel mixture to the point where the elevation doesn't affect you as much. So can you still run 85 octane fuel in a turbocharged engine at high elevations? And again, we're not going to reveal whether or not we were running 85 in this truck in the Powerboost. But let's just say it's not recommended in the manual. But if you've got a modern engine that has knock sensors, ping sensors, like most modern engines do, and the ability to control the turbo boost and to control the ignition timing, some of which can even control the valve timing, a lot of which can, it is entirely possible that you can safely run 85 octane fuel in a high compression or turbocharged engine at high altitudes. And that's all we're going to say about that. But everyone needs to make their own decision on that subject. You know, let the buyer beware. And don't take it from someone else. Again, in the EcoBoost, if you notice it start to knock or ping, we don't know anybody who has. The only thing we've ever noticed or heard is that, well, some people say you get reduced power out of lower octane fuel because the engine can't run quite as aggressive an ignition timing profile or quite as much boost. But nobody we have ever talked to or ever heard has ever said that 87 or lower octane is going to make this engine actually have sustained amounts of knocking and pinging. You know, it's just so modern and so well designed. You know, it can correct for lower octane fuel. Okay, enough on that subject. Hope you all are having a great day. We are enjoying our drive into Las Vegas and points further south, and we will talk to you later.